Sometimes in areas we come across very luminous rod buildings that seem to emit light and energy, and they're usually in the same area. So this is one example here. The actual rod building itself is so luminous that it actually seems to produce light rather than just reflect it. And the luminous edges around here are very tiny rods, very thin rods. We'll just do a quick measurement of the structure. The width would be about 1/4 of a kilometre, which happens normal. Yes, 1/4 of a kilometre. The smaller ones down the bottom are very fine rods, so we'll do this one. It's about 40 metres, which again, it's not a small structure. Seems to be like a picket fence around the edge on one side, a large excavation and very luminous. It could be a source of, it could be due to atomic fusion. The rumour is it's helium-3 that's used for atomic fusion reactions. We'll just go through and see these others. So from ground level, about 7.2 kilometres, we see a whole group of very luminous buildings in this area. Extremely luminous. We'll just go on this one here as well. They're very luminous. We'll go down to the next one. So from high up they can be seen as very luminous structures. We'll stop there. That's about 3.6 kilometres. Very luminous. Straight away we can see it's too bright just to be a normal structure there. It seems to be actually emitting light. Here we go. Again, we have this zigzag picket fence tile around it, an internal tower, then the external ones, and they're very luminous. And we'll just go to one more nearby. From high up, it's about 1.5 kilometres, it's very bright. So it seems that these towers are actually emitting energy in this case, rather than just being normal reflections. That is a very, very bright structure. So it's very common again that with these structures, some are not luminous like the ones here, and then we come across these very, very bright luminous ones. They're normal ones there. They don't seem to emit energy that jumps at you virtually from a high altitude. Again, they happen in, this one is very bright, so we'll just see why. We'll zoom in. This is emitting very strong light. Just steady the screen. We'll just see a faint outline of those fine rods there. I'll just again try to steady the screen here. Here we go. It's as though it's looking at a light bulb, the actual filaments of a light bulb. That's the only way I can describe it. Actually, that's the best way. We'll see what appears to be 1, 2 zigzag there, then a square structure, a few little rod filaments coming off. This structure seems to resemble a filament, globe filament. That's the only way to describe it. It's actually like looking into a light globe, where the filaments emit so much light they actually have their own bright white line consistency. So that's a very good example there. As we go higher up, we can still make out the squarish pattern. It's around an excavation. That one there as well, which you've seen before, but this one here is actually so bright that I think it could be seen from probably nearly 10 kilometres high up now. And there it is. It's like a bright filament, globe filament. Extremely bright. Now compare this to nearby rod structures here. That's a good example. They're about the same length, same width as one down the bottom, but there's no way they emit that much energy. So we've got a source of very, very strong energy being emitted. And the rumour is, again, it's atomic energy, fusion due to helium-3. And that is so bright, it is just extraordinary, the one that I've captured here compared to the other ones. See, that one there is no way as bright, but again we have a rod, a building on one side full of rod structures, and we've got that fine zigzag pattern around the other side of the excavation. This one I'm just surprised it's so intense. So they're very easy to find by going in at very high levels. And we'll just go into this one down here. Again, how this can be a natural structure I don't know. We've got 2 or 3 towers and that squarish zigzag pattern around it. Here we've got rectangular, like courtyard patterns around there. It's very hard to believe this could be a natural structure, especially that very bright filament structure we had. If we come into this area here, we're just zooming across and we come again to an area where we can see like a ridge happening here, which is full of little towers. Then all of a sudden we see a nice pattern emerging of a rod structure here. It's bright, but it isn't as bright as that last filament we saw, rod filament, squarish pattern. So these are bright as well, and they're inside the crater as well. They seem to emit energy in this case as well. We're going high up again, we're about 4.5 kilometres. As we zoom in, we see very large towers here. We see that zigzag pattern there on the edge of the crater. Again, it's hard to explain how this could be a natural formation. I'm trying to always find reasons why it could be, because the other explanation is harder to believe. It's 70 metres high. That it's an alien built city virtually, the landscape of the moon. And here we go, we see one more bright structure, 2 or 3 more bright ones. Just zoom into that one. So virtually they're not hard to find now. You'll see like a filament structure. We've got a rod building there that isn't as bright, and straight away we've got this very bright squarish pattern here, a filament type of situation, very bright rod filament. Nowhere as bright as the rod structure nearby, indicating it could emit some type of energy source. So these are not hard to spot at about 5 kilometres up. We'll go to this area here. We see a nice bright pattern emerging. There's about 2 or 3 buildings here. Here we go again. It's hard to believe how this could be a natural structure. We've got zigzag squarish patterns and the rod towers there. There's a shadow from that rod building. This is typical. We've got an excavation, many rod structures around one side, the other side is deficient. Many rod patterns around one side, the other side a very fine layer, and there we've got 2 or 3 inside. So this is just by casually browsing over the landscape, we can spot these structures at a very high distance, and some are extremely luminous that seem to emit very bright light. Here we've got something very good happening. Actually 2 structures here from high up. We're about 3.5 kilometres. If we zoom into this one here, we'll see 1 or 2 very luminous towers, a smaller one, which still can be seen from very high up. Here we have a very bright luminous pattern. It's not hard to spot this one. That emits energy. That's energy emitted. There's no way that could just be a normal reflection. Actually, if we play around with the time gauge on here, we can have a look at these structures changing according to the angle of the sun. So these are various days throughout the month, and I think the angle of the sunlight will highlight a few of the internal rods that point inwards like that. There we go. So if we switch that off, this image has caught the ones internal. I'll just label that one. It is very intense. These rod towers, the light is so intense it actually converges and forms one blob. That's how intense it is. Again, it's very intense compared to the other structures, but again we have the common larger rod towers around one side, a very fine lattice around the other, and usually 1 or 2 internals. That one can be seen from 2 kilometres to very bright, and even when we go up to 4 kilometres we can see a definite pattern of an intelligent created structure. as opposed to a natural structure. It's hard to believe these could be just unnatural structures of those sort of patterns. Here we go again. We'll see 1 or 2, 3, 4 here. We'll see an excavated area around it. Could this be a natural? I'll leave you to guess that. We see one more luminous rod building here, extremely luminous, where actually it's so luminous that you lose the individual lines of rods there. They all merge to form one bright luminous mass. There's internal ones and a very fine pinpoint lattice network. 1, 2, 3, 4 that seems to be always around the other side of a rod, a building. The excavation is always in the middle, and this is one more example of a luminous one. They seem to be fairly easy to spot from about 4 kilometres high up, as they're too bright to be considered normal. Too bright. As opposed to, for instance, these ones we see here. These are normal rod buildings surrounded by the zigzag structures again. That one's unusual. There's a lot more zigzags around that one, zigzag patterns. There's one there. That's a very good example of something that's very hard to believe how that could be a natural structure. We've got the rectangular-like courtyard around that side. The internal ones we always see, the larger ones on this side, and very fine lattice around this side here, but it's nowhere near as luminous as the ones we saw high up. And again, we point out the common towers around a crater, always around the edge. This was seen the Tychos craters, which are a lot older and look very eroded, and there's no greenery in that area in the Tychos craters. Here we have an example of perpendicular one. This is just zooming into the perpendicular one here, at the edge of the crater. We're at a height of 15 kilometres now, and straight away we see one more luminous one. Very intense, very bright. We'll now drop down to 4. Still very intense, very bright. And we see a little one group just above it. These are smaller ones, obviously. They're about that's about 30 metres high. We'll see the shadows from those 2 or 3 heading on the other side. This one is very intense. We'll just do a quick measurement. The width I estimate probably again 1/4 kilometre. No, actually bigger. It's about 320 metres. Again, we've got a very luminous, intense, light-emitting congregation of rod towers on one side, excavation, and that very well-seen zigzag pattern of rod towers around the other edge that are a lot smaller. That is very luminous, and that could be seen from at least 15 kilometres. So these are very easy to spot from high up. You don't need that much skill to find these very big luminous ones. We've just come into this area here. That's one more example. These look very normal. There's 2 or 3 there in that pocket. And all of a sudden the ones here resemble a light globe filament. They seem to emit energy in a very, very pinpoint emitter. So you'll see a very faint line there, and around the edges as well. And that emits a lot of light. So in this video I'm just trying to show how the different rod buildings are either very highly luminous, and I call them filament, light filament type buildings, where they are so intense you'll see just a very fine filament, and the other ones are relatively normal. Scanning across, we'll just come to 2 or 3 here again. That's very normal. You'll see 2 or 3 towers and a zigzag pattern around there. It's not difficult to find these at a high altitude. All you need is to zoom in at about this height and they just jump out at you. There they are. Here we go again. They become very filament, very faint line, but very bright, very skinny line. And again, they seem to emit energy rather than just be like the normal ones nearby.